Okay, welcome back for another lesson here. This is multiplication of real numbers. We're going to be multiplying today. I'm not going to read you through all the rules because you should already know them, but I'm going to give you some examples. Okay? So, first rule states that a positive times negative, or sorry, positive times positive is positive, so 3 times 4 is 12. All positives. Okay? Then the next rule, negative times negative is positive, so if I do negative 3 times negative 4, that will still equal a positive for me. Then if I do a positive 3 times a negative 4, that's going to give me a negative answer, a negative 12. And then if I do a negative 3 times a positive 4, that's going to give me a negative answer again. Okay, so positive times positive, positive, negative times negative, positive, positive times negative, negative, and negative times positive, negative. Got it? Good. Let's move on. Okay, we need to talk about the properties of multiplication. Properties of multiplication are very similar to the addition properties. First one is commutative. Commutative says I can take numbers and multiply them in any order and it doesn't change the product, the answer. So A times B is the same as B times A if I flip it around. So 3 times 4. If I flip that around, I should get the same answer. Well, 3 times 4 is 12, and 4 times 3 is 12. Those are the same, so it doesn't matter what order I multiply them in. The associative property says that I can group things differently, okay, and still get the same answer. So I can have a problem like this, and a problem like this, and get the same answer. Okay, well in this problem here, I should do 3 times 4 first, because it's in parentheses. Over here I should do 4 times 5 first, because it's in parentheses. The associative property says it doesn't matter which way you do that. So 3 times 4 is 12, and 12 times 5 is 60. So over here I get 60. Over here I do 4 times 5 first and get 20, and then multiply by 3. 20 times 3 is 60. So I got 60 on both sides. Okay, so it's the same thing. Identity property says if I take 1 times any number, I should get the same number. So 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 2 is 2, so on. Property of 0 says that if I take any number and multiply by 0, I always get 0. So 5 times 0 is 0. 20 times 0 is 0. Negative 3 times 0 is 0. It doesn't matter. Then the property of opposites. The property of opposites says that I can take negative 1 times any number, and I'm going to get the opposite of that number. So if I take negative 1 times 5, my answer is the opposite of 5, or negative 5. Okay? Or if I take negative 1 times negative 5, my answer is the opposite of negative 5, which is positive 5. Alright, let's go on to some more examples. Okay, our first objective today is to multiply real numbers using the properties of multiplication. Alright, so basically what we're going to do is we're just going to be multiplying numbers. And we got a couple different examples for you here. Okay, first, we got negative 3 times 4 times negative 2. Again, it doesn't matter what order I multiply these in, we should still get the same answer. So we're just going to start by multiplying these two. Negative 3 times 4 is negative 12. And negative 12 times negative 2 equals, well, 12 times 2 is 24. And a negative times a negative is a positive. Remember, when you got numbers that are separated by just parentheses, that's the same as multiplying. Alright, let's do another example. Okay, well, we can do this one first. Doesn't matter. I got negative 1/2 times negative 2. Remember, another way to say multiply is the word of. So this is asking me, well, what's 1/2 of 2? Well, 1/2 of 2 is 1. And then a negative times a negative is a positive. So negative 1/2 of negative 2 is positive 1. Then I'm going to multiply that by negative 3. And my answer is negative 3. Alright, now, this example. Love these. Okay, we got to remember what the, how these are different from each other. Okay, the third and fourth examples. So the first thing that I want to do is rewrite the problem so I know what I'm multiplying together. So I'm taking negative 1/2 to the 4th power. That means I'm doing negative 1/2 times negative 1/2 times negative 1/2 times negative 1/2. Okay? Now remember, when we multiply fractions, you multiply the tops. Okay, I'm going to do this all in one shot. Make sure you do show me this work, by the way. When you have these ones with exponents like this, okay, show me what numbers you're multiplying together. I've got negative 1/2. I'm multiplying together 4 times because that's what this says. And this says the negative 1/2 has to be multiplied every time. So multiply the tops. Well, 1 times 1 is 1, times 1 is 1, times 1 is 1. So my top is just 1. Multiply the bottoms. 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. Okay, now I got to figure out if my answer is positive or negative. Okay, so let's think about this here. A negative times a negative is a positive. Okay, so I put these together to make a positive. Then, a positive times a negative is a negative. So I'm combining these to make a negative. And now I've got a negative times a negative, which is a positive. So it's positive 1/16. Okay? And the last example. Okay, this one's a little trickier. Now, this is saying this is the opposite of 1/2 to the 4th power. Okay? This isn't negative 1/2 to the 4th power. This right here is negative 1/2 to the 4th power. This is the opposite of 1/2 to the 4th power. Okay? So I'm taking the opposite of 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2. Notice the difference between these two problems right here. Okay? Here, I'm multiplying the negative every time because it was in the parentheses. Here, I'm not using the negative every time. I'm only using it once. Okay? Because it's not in the parentheses. Well, first we got to do our parentheses here. 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2. We just did that one up there. That's 1/16. Okay? But now it says my answer needs to be the opposite of that. So my answer is negative 1/16 now. Okay? Again, when this negative's, when this negative is in parentheses, it carries through every single time. When it's not in the parentheses, you only use it once. Okay? That's a big difference that we need to make sure we know. Alright, let's go on to another example. Okay, let's talk products with variable factors. Okay? Well, the rules don't change at all. Now we're just using variables. So, negative 2 times x. Some of you like to write these out, and the reason why I put this one on here is because you have to recognize that the better way to write this is negative 2x. Okay? I don't need the times sign in here when I'm separating a number from a variable. This means the same thing. Okay? This is negative 2 times x. Alright. Now in this one, the second one here, I got negative 3 times x times the opposite of x times x. Alright? Well, again, it doesn't matter what order I multiply things in, so let's just stick some things together. Okay? Let's go ahead and start with these two right here. Well, negative 3 times x. Well, that's negative 3x. Okay? And I still have to multiply these two. Okay? Now, negative 3x times negative x. Well, anytime I want to multiply variables, when I have numbers involved, okay, I first multiply the numbers. Well, here, there's a 3. Here, there's no number. So I don't have any numbers to multiply, so I just put the 3 there. Then I multiply the letters, x times x. Well, that's 2 x's, so that's x squared. Then lastly, look at the signs. A negative times a negative, that's a positive. So it's positive 3x squared. Now I got to take that times x. That's the last thing I have to do here. Okay? So, 3x squared times x. Again, there's no numbers to multiply together, so I put 3. And then x squared times x. That's 2x's times 1x, so that's x to the 3rd power. 3x to the 3rd. Alright. And we got 2 more examples here. I'm going to move my screen. Oh, no, I'm not. Okay. Oh, here, okay, we've got the opposite of y to the 4th power. Alright, so what that means is we're going to do this one down over here, okay? It's the opposite of y to the fourth. So y times y times y times y. Okay? Well, y times y times y times y, that's 4 y's. So that's y to the fourth power. Then it's the opposite of that. Okay? The opposite of y to the fourth power. So that looks just like the answer that we started with, or the problem we started with. Okay? And that's okay. It can do that. Now, let's look at this example right here. The opposite of a squared times the opposite of a to the third times the opposite of a to the fifth. So basically, the opposite of a squared is the opposite of a times the opposite of a. Okay? Well, that's the a squared. Now the opposite of a to the third. That's 3 of them. Okay? And I got the opposite of a to the fifth. So now I'm just going to go ahead and write these down here. There's 5 more. Alright. So, now, this is where this gets a little tricky here. Alright? The very first thing I would do is just count up your a's. Okay? Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them. So it's going to be a to the 10th. Now we just have to figure out if it's positive or negative. A to the 10th. Okay? Well, again, we can do that. We know that a negative times a negative is a positive. And then a positive times a negative is a negative. And a negative times a negative is a positive. Okay, so let's go ahead and combine these here. We got a positive times a negative times a negative, that's a positive. Then a positive times a negative is a negative. And then a negative times a negative is a positive. And positive times a negative is a negative. Okay, so I ended on the negative here. Now I'm taking this negative times this negative. That's positive. Positive times a negative is a negative. Negative times a negative is a positive. Positive times a negative is a negative. And a negative times a negative is a positive. So it's positive a to the 10th power. Okay? Here's an easy way to remember that. If there is an odd number of negatives, then your answer is negative. And if there's an even number of negatives in your problem, then your answer is positive. Okay? Well, let's look at those examples up here again. If I count up the number of negatives in the problem we just did, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 negatives. Oh, that's an even number of negatives, so the answer ends up being positive. Okay? If I look at example number 2 that we did, there's 1, 2 negatives, so the answer was positive. Up in the first example, there's 1 negative, so the answer is negative, because that's an odd number. Okay? So that's the way to remember that. Alright, we got one more example. Okay, it says evaluate when x equals the opposite of 5, or negative 5. Okay, so we've got negative 4 times negative 1 times the opposite of x. Okay? So the opposite of 4 times the opposite of 1 times the opposite of x. Evaluate means I want to plug in that number for x. So I'm going to rewrite the problem first. I got negative 4, the opposite of 4, times negative 1, the opposite of 1. And then I want the opposite of x. Well, my x is negative 5, so the opposite of x is positive 5. Okay? We need to understand why this ended up being positive, because this is the opposite of x, and this is negative 5, so it's the opposite of negative 5. Now we multiply. Negative 4 times negative 1 is 4, times 5, that's 20. Okay? Again, multiplication is fun. The reason why multiplication is fun is because it's so darn easy. Okay? Have a lot of fun multiplying today. Good luck.